Welcome back, everybody, to another segment of Wednesday Wisdom, sponsored by K-12 Sports Tech. We're going to be right back with this week's Wednesday Wisdom guest, but as always, we want to give a shout out to all of our great sponsors. So take the next 3 minutes. Don't hit that fast forward button. I'm watching you. These are all great companies that I used as an athletic director. I highly recommend that you use them. So listen to our shout outs, then listen to our Wednesday Wisdom guest, and then go and visit these sponsors. I'm telling you, you're going to be glad you did. Here we go. We want to thank our good friends at K-12 Sports Tech for sponsoring Wednesday Wisdom. K-12 Sports Tech helps athletic directors and sport vendors connect through education along with hands-on consulting services. ADs are also invited to join the K-12 Sports Tech AD think tank and help influence how companies actually shape their tech to better serve schools. To get started, just go to k12sportstech.com. We also want to thank our friends at Snap Raise. Have you ever spent weeks and weeks with a fundraiser and then been disappointed in the results? Well, those days are gone. Go to snapraise.com. It's hands down the best online fundraiser out there. We used it at our school with great success. Our coaches loved it. Our parents loved it because it works. Go to snapraise.com. You can check out their other great platforms. But if you're looking for a fundraiser, you just found it. Go to snapraise.com. We'd like to thank our friends at Athletic Surveys by LifeTrack. You know, at my school, we use surveys for everything: kids, coaches, parents, you name it. And the information that would come back was almost always over the top positive. Yeah, there were some complainers, but it allowed us to hear what their concerns were and then address them. But the important thing was we had all of that data, that 98%, supporting our program, which was incredibly valuable, especially when you're talking with that frustrated parent or maybe your principal or even your school board. Go to athleticsurveys.com. They're going to create a custom survey that lets you take the pulse of everybody in your program. That's athleticsurveys.com. We'd like to thank Home Campus. Home Campus is a platform you're going to use every single day, whether it's scheduling, results, rosters. Their athletic eligibility and clearance platform alone is worth the price. Now, even if your state uses another platform for scores and rosters, you can still use Home Campus's athletic clearance platform. Just go to homecampus.com to get more information. Make sure you mention our podcast too. That's homecampus.com. We also want to thank Sideline Interactive, indoor score tables and video boards. Go to sidelineinteractive.com and you can schedule a live web demo to see their score tables and their score boards in action. Probably one of the best purchases I ever made was our Sideline Interactive indoor score table. Go to sidelineinteractive.com for more information. We want to thank Huddle for their support. As a football coach, I used Huddle for years, but when I became an athletic director, I made sure that our school was a Huddle school. And our coaches, all of our coaches, just loved the tools that Huddle provided. Our student athletes loved the videos, and our parents loved the streaming, but there is so much more. Go to huddle.com, join the 8 million users, and find out how to turn your school into a Huddle school. Again, don't forget to mention the podcast. We want to thank Ohio University and their online masters in athletic administration. Now, I didn't get my master's from Ohio University, but my assistant athletic director did, along with hundreds of others, and it was a great experience. It's very affordable, just 20 months, totally online. And while you're completing your master's degree, you're also completing 11 NIAAA leadership training courses at no extra charge. For more information, just go to ohio.edu/info/MAA, the Ohio University Online Masters in Athletic Administration. We'd like to say thanks to Gipper. You know, your students are on social media, so are a lot of their parents. And if they're not seeing content that celebrates their accomplishments and promotes their program, you're missing out on a great opportunity. Go to Gipper.com. It's used and trusted by over 20,000 high school and college programs across the country. And whether it's a Social media post celebrating a big victory, or a newsletter telling all of your constituents the great things your program's doing, the Gipper team is going to have you creating world-class content in seconds. That's Gipper.com. Check out their platform today, Gipper.com. We also want to thank Hometown Ticketing. Hometown is the leading digital ticketing provider to schools and colleges. And whether it's more support, more security, or more customization, the Hometown team is here to help you make the best ticketing solution for online ticketing. Go to hometownticketing.com. It's digital ticketing that offers more. We want to thank our good friends at Vital Signs Wall of Fame. If you're looking for a really cool way to display your school record boards for all the teams, for all the different events, or to show off your school's Hall of Fame, go to Vital Signs Wall of Fame and take a look at their interactive touch screen. That's right, touch screen video consoles. It's also a great way to share your school's unique history and brag a little bit about your proudest moments. The website is vitalsignswalloffame.com. Mention the podcast, they'll give you a nice discount. vitalsignswalloffame.com. Welcome back, everybody, to another segment of Wednesday Wisdom on the Educational AD Podcast. Remember, Wednesday Wisdom is brought to you by K-12 Sports Tech. Joining us for her second time as a Wednesday Wisdom presenter, one of our favorite guests, Dr. Courtney Beck. If you're new to the podcast, Dr. Beck was on for a full-length interview. I encourage you to go back and listen to it. She is many things. She's an adjunct professor at Florida State University. She is a podcaster of her own. She, works with individuals. She works with teams. She's got a ton of projects going on, and we're excited that she's a part of our team. Courtney Beck, welcome back to Wednesday Wisdom.
Well, Jake, it is quite the honor to be on your Wednesday Wisdom team. So thank you for having me today.
We want to give acknowledgement to our great friend, Dr. Megan Bunning, also of Florida State University, for connecting us. She reached out to me and said she thought you would be a great guest for the podcast. I agreed, and here you are on Wednesday Wisdom. So I'm going to get out of the way. What do you have for our listeners on this segment of Wednesday Wisdom?
Well, Jake, today we are going to talk about the competitive mindset. I am so passionate about the competitive mindset, not only in the realm of sport, but how I've been able to translate it into my professional career. So, to first begin, I always like to start off with a positive quote. So, this quote today is by Serena Williams. Competition ignites passion, determination, and the pursuit of excellence. So, quite a positive quote there to at least start it off with. But the competitive mindset, I'm going to take the audience through the lens of an athlete. So, I was a former elite level gymnast. I also competed at the University of Florida. So, of course, at that D1 level, the pressure is intense, both, at dual meets for gymnastics, as well as that championship season or part of the season, if you will. So I always like to begin with literally how I had developed my competitive mindset. It began at a very early age. I would have to argue around like 7 or 8 years old. I was in front of the TV watching the 1996 Olympic Games. So in the sport of gymnastics, we would know that team as the Magnificent Seven. I would watch every mannerism during that competition, the finals, the way that they prepared, who was about to enter, onto the apparatus, what were they doing right before? And you'll see a lot of the times, particularly within the sport of gymnastics, you see girls doing these like movements, like as if they're pushing through the air, flipping, turning, and yet they're just standing there like waiting to obviously salute and mount the apparatus. But the idea of going through a mental routine for preparation. So I would watch this, and throughout the years, it would really help me develop my own competitive mindset. And obviously, a lot of it came with maturity, but I will say, the competitive mindset truly begins in practice. You want to be able to compete the way that you practice. You don't want to really do something in practice and then change the game right before you're about to like step up in competition. So by being in practice, you're obviously really focused on repetition on events. So repetition, repetition, repetition. Well, that ultimately creates consistency. And that consistency will lead to the development of confidence in that athlete. And so I think about my time at University of Florida. We, especially during preseason, it was really a focus on repetition. You would be able to then taper off, of course, during competition season, but during that preseason, it was all about getting numbers in. And so, what we would do, especially nearing that competition season, we would do what's called pressure sets. So essentially, there would be a gymnast ready to do a routine on an apparatus. Let's just say the balance beam, for example. And we'd have the whole team, we'd have the staff and everybody. So I don't know, maybe upwards to 20, 25 people or something. And they would really focus in on the gymnast. You could literally hear like a pin drop. Okay. It was so quiet. But the whole idea was to allow that athlete to really go through their competitive mindset. How are they going to prepare for that apparatus? And how are they going to put themselves in that position when, in fact, in competition, it would have been thousands of people. So you really have to remain focused. Now, for myself, what I would always do if we were in a competition, I look at it as kind of like pre-competition and then during competition, as well as in between. So that could be like if I competed on vault, for example, I had bars, the uneven bars, which I did not compete. And then I would go to compete for beam. So for those other sports out there that are maybe tuning in right now, it's kind of like halftime, if you will. So I just want to give that as like, kind of like an example before I actually get to that. So pre-competition, competition, and then kind of that halftime to still remain focused. So, what I would particularly do with my competitive mindset is I would kind of go to the side right before I was about to compete from the team. So, I would kind of remove myself and I would visualize my routine. It was all positive talk. So if it was quick, words, catchy phrases like, pull up, tight, calm, breathe, tight legs, like anything that was only focused on literally positivity. It was not, oh, if I wobble, what is that going to look like? No, it was all positive talk. I would then walk up to the balance beam, for example, and my coach would speak to me, maybe say like one or two sentences, and then it was locked in time. So it was that idea of being laser focused in the zone, is what I always like to call it, that competitive mindset. But once I was up on the balance beam, there were thousands of people. We would go to University of Utah. They had over 15,000 people. So whether it was 5,000 people or 15,000 people, it did not matter because at that point I was locked in. And once again, going through my routine, I was all about positive self-talk until I landed and saluted. And then, of course, went running back like crazy because I was so excited. Of course, if I, hit a good routine. But during that competition, say that was the balance beam, moving forward, or excuse me, say that, even was like the vault, because typically the Olympic lineup was vault, then you'd go to bars and then beam and then floor. So that halftime, if you will, if I was off an event, I would still remain focused. So I didn't worry about what the scores were. Our coaches always told us, you can't control that. You can't control what the other team's doing. So why worry about it, right? You have a job to do. If you're first, second, third, fourth lineup type thing, that is what you can control. And how are you going to produce positive results, of course, for your team? Well, if I was helping, for example, set up the cables on bars, I was all positive self-talk, what I was going to go through for that next event. I wasn't looking in the crowd, worrying about friends and like if certain family members showed up or not, but really focused in on the team. Sometimes the music would be going, you're seeing who's dancing there. But I will say for the most part, you were really like focused, in on what you had to produce. So that would then take me to that next event. But the whole point I'm trying to make is whether that was in the sport of gymnastics, or this could obviously equate to other sports as well, such as like a halftime, to always remain focused, to always remain very consistent with literally like your mental routine. So whether it was in practice, the way I would practice, I wanted to literally translate the same thing into competition. And I noticed over time, blocking out noise if something happened in the stands. Literally, people would ask me to this day, like, how did you compete in front of thousands? It was not even a factor because you literally, it's almost like you couldn't hear anything. I know that sounds kind of, different from maybe those audience members have never like been in that, situation, but really it's so quiet in your mind because it's literally you and the apparatus. And a lot of the times when we talk about like pressure, I thrived under pressure. I would start the team off. Most of the time, I was always, literally the start of the meet. So we would start on vault. I would literally open up the meet, but I thrived on those positions. And I think what really helped me produce like positive results, like whether it was a stuck landing on that first vault to really start escalating those scores for the team, it was I would salute. I would say something positive to myself. And as I'm, going into the vault runway, take a deep breath, let it out, and then go. And that was my particular routine in how I got into that competitive mindset. And as I would go through sport, I noticed very quickly I stopped the sport at 21. I couldn't go anymore. I wasn't going to go to the Olympics, but I was thinking, how could I translate this now into my professional career? And I always like to give the example of if I were presenting something, I've done many presentations. What I would do is I would practice, practice, practice. Just like I said in sport, the competitive mindset truly stems from practice. So I would make sure that if in fact I got into the actual presentation and if I got nervous or if I had, butterflies or something, that I already knew in my head what was going to be said next because it literally would occur from repetition. So it's the same mindset from sport to business career, if you want to say like business or career. And through that presentation, once it was like, action, if you will, I was up there. I had already presented, so to speak, in practice so many times. I knew what was going to be said next. I knew if somebody got up and went to the restroom or the door, accidentally closed or something, I was not going to be rattled by my surroundings because once again, I was, quote, in the zone. I was laser focused on doing the best to my ability. I'm not saying that every presentation went great or smooth, if you will, but that was always what I wanted to happen. I would train for that, if you will, like when we talk about the crossover between sport and business, but I would always practice for that, quote, perfect presentation. If I achieved something that was close, of course, we can't, seek absolute perfection, but I would at least aim for that. And after the presentation that I would give, at least if I could remain, kind of afterwards, just reflecting on how I actually presented. And if I could be like, at least, okay, I did it to the best of my ability, that's really all you could ask for. And so I think the competitive mindset, from my experience in sport, as well as translating over into business, has been extremely beneficial. And I think it's a great crossover. I think it mimics a lot of things that you do learn in sport as you develop your competitive mindset, but how that could be easily translatable into business and career to achieve the success that you would like. So, Jake, that is all I have for today for the topic of the competitive mindset. And thank you so much for having me today.
Well, as they like to say on college game day, not so fast. For our listeners, again, great stuff, Courtney. Thanks for sharing. Courtney, I didn't share, and Courtney didn't. She knows of what she speaks. She was not just a gymnast; she was a Division I All American gymnast in college, competing at an extremely high level. We talk about only 6% of high school students go on to compete at any level in college. Well, she was part of that 6%, but then she was part of, I'm going to guess that the next 6% that was very successful. Again, All American status. Uh, Courtney, a couple quick questions. I said this as an athletic director. I think I may have thought it as a coach, but I say it now a lot as somebody who talks to ADs and coaches. I don't think there's a coach in America at any level or the world that would dispute the value of mental performance training, sports performance training, positive self-talk, all those things. Yeah, they will say, yeah, it's important. Now the trick is to get the coach to devote some time to that aspect during a weekly practice or even a daily session. So here's my question to you. Was this something that was program directed? The coaches were talking about mental performance, or is this something that you and your teammates maybe picked up on your own?
No, excellent question, Jake. And I will say it started at the club level. So as I was, climbing the ranks, but it really was application at that collegiate level. So when we did get to, for example, just in my case, like the University of Florida, as I had mentioned, we did a lot of pressure sets. So that's when you were really focused on that, mental routine or that competitive mindset where you were able to apply it before you got into competition. So without a doubt, whether it was at that club level, really training, of course, you're young, you're seeing literally what works for you, how you compete in certain pressure situations as you're 13, 14 years old versus, of course, a more mature outlook when you are in college. So I would have to say I learned a lot of it growing up in club level as far as gymnastics goes. But then as I would transition at the collegiate level, the real focus was on those pressure sets during practice. And what was going through my mind is to how did I produce good results in practice is exactly what I wanted to translate over into competition. So if we had that pressure set, I started off with positive self talk, visualization off to the side. If I applied that and I hit or I nailed a routine, that's exactly what I was going to be applying in competition. So whether it was that, whether it was the self talk during the routine, keeping that focus through those, quote, halftime, if you will, I think that's really important. So yes, it was applied more so in college when we did like mental, like, preparation sets before the actual competition.
All right, putting you on the spot here. You were part of a successful team. You certainly, had a lot to do with that team success. Um, for your teammates, and again, I don't want you to name names or anything. Did you have teammates that 100% embraced, the mental training aspect versus maybe a teammate who, that stuff's not important, and it showed up in each of their performances? Was that a thing, or am I just reaching here?
No, I think that's an excellent question. I think what you would really see, especially during practices, was our coaches would really help us stay focused because truthfully, as we know in almost any sport for that matter, but particularly in gymnastics, if you are not focused, you could get seriously injured. And so, so to your point, the mental focusing on the mental routines for each gymnast was really honed in during practices for each gymnast. However, if you did see, for example, I mean, there was many times, actually it happened to me distinctively once. I remember it stands out in my mind, but it happened on several occasions. But I fell during a dual meet, and I don't think it wasn't a championship season meet, I don't think, if I remember correctly. But I remember I fell on vault and I still had to compete on beam. And so I'll never forget, and I don't want to don't use these quotes, but our coach would always tell us like a true champion is one who is able to maybe take that unfortunate fall, but completely erase it and come back even stronger for that team when they're counting on you for that third rotation. So Courtney, it wasn't great that you fell, obviously, but as we move forward, it's erased. You can't take it back. You move forward. And I think that is one lesson, Jake, that has stood out in my mind. And I have certainly applied it into my professional career. If something happens, you learn from it and you move forward and you excel. How could I come back even stronger? So I don't know if that necessarily answered your question, particularly pertaining to another athlete, but I wanted to use myself as an example because if I'm not truly focused and honed in, a fall could happen out of nowhere. I remember sitting on the ground thinking to myself, did that just happen? Like, I mean, literally thousands of people and you're on the ground and you just started off the team, like not the meet because the
Right.
opposing team does, but that how does that happen? Well, you have to learn just in life to pick yourself back up, resilience, perseverance, come back even stronger. And I actually did. I remembered I came back strong on that next event, and it was one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned. But she focused, the head coach as well as the assistant coaches, a lot on mental performance, on creating that mental routine to then obviously produce success in a competition pressure.
But no, you definitely answered the question, and you took it even further because it's such a great lesson for all of us, all of our listeners, me too. In any sport, football, you drop that pass, hey, you got to forget it. You miss that free throw, you strike out in baseball or softball, whatever it is, you got to keep moving forward. What a great lesson. Okay. Well,
Thank you.
for our listeners, how would they maybe get started on their mental performance journey? And again, listeners, you have a tremendous resource here. Courtney, as I mentioned, she's an author, she's a speaker, she has her own podcast. You should put that on your listening list. How can they get a hold of you, and maybe what other steps might you suggest they take?
Oh, thank you, Jake. So as far as just general like contact information, it's related to my business. So literally just Courtney, Courtney at plentyofpositivity.com. And as well, I'm an adjunct professor at Florida State University. So I also have that email as well, much more simplistic, if you will. So C.A. Beck, Beck, at fsu.edu. So basically, it's Courtney Ann Beck. And I mean, I'm always open to discussing sport. I absolutely love sport. I was so grateful for the sport of gymnastics. So if you get me started talking on a topic of sport, I may have your ear at least for 30 minutes or an hour because I'm so passionate in sharing that. But I'm sorry, what was the other question, Jake, that you had?
Oh, well, again, I want to make sure we got the contact information out there. And
Mhm.
again, for listeners, the podcast is called Plenty of Positivity. If there was ever a podcast title or an email address that encapsulated the host, Plenty of Positivity, I love it. Um, any quick resources, other websites, or a book that you might recommend for that coach that's saying, yeah, I need to find out more about this whole mental performance, performance thing?
Yeah, so I do want to say I am certainly not a psychologist. I learned a lot of this through my own personal experience. But certainly there's a tremendous amount of resources out there. As you had mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, Jake, Dr. Megan Bunning is an excellent resource. She has such a high level of expertise, particularly pertaining to mental performance. So I would highly recommend her. But just in general, like I said, I think a lot of my advice that I do give is simply from my own personal experience at sport as I climb the levels to that elite level and what kind of worked for me as well as what didn't work for me. As I, stated before, there were mistakes that were certainly made. And I did have to go back to that drawing board to kind of reassess like, what do I have to tweak in my competitive mindset to really achieve, the great results that I really want. So That's my answer for that.
No, and I love how you got Megan Bunning back in there again. And again, Dr. Bunning, she works, locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. That's her game. Courtney, I'm going to let you go because it's incredibly busy, I know. But thanks again for sharing with our listeners. All the best as you move forward. And we're going to look forward, as always, to your next visit on Wednesday Wisdom.
Well, thank you so much, Jake, and thank you for what you do, just providing all this information. So keep up the great work. I'm so honored to be on this podcast.
Oh, well, the honor is ours. For our listeners, just a reminder, we upload the Zoom recordings of every interview to the Educational AD Podcast YouTube channel. We do this segment every week and just about every day. We try to share stories and best practices. So come back and join us again on the next episode of the Educational AD Podcast. We'll see you next time. Always a great time with Dr. Courtney Beck. Make sure you follow her. She's on LinkedIn. She's on Twitter. Also, well, I guess she's on X. Also on Instagram, Dr. Courtney Beck. Uh, as always, we want to give a shout out to our sponsors. Remember, Wednesday Wisdom sponsored by K-12 Sports Tech, along with our other great sponsors. So please visit them. Gipper, Huddle, Home Campus, Sideline Interactive, Snap Raise, Hometown Ticketing, the Ohio University Online Masters in Athletic Administration, Vital Signs Wall of Fame, and Athletic Surveys by LifeTrack. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time on Wednesday Wisdom on the Educational AD Podcast.